You've been quiet long enough. You've given enough. You've waited, wondered, and replayed every word in your head. Now it's your turn to shift the power back into your hands. Not with manipulation, not with desperation, but with unapologetic, undeniable self-command. The kind that doesn't chase, it attracts. The kind that doesn't beg, it decides. You don't need to perform to be seen. You need to become so anchored in your worth that nothing outside of you can shake it. The moment you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing validation, and stop putting yourself on pause for someone else's inconsistency, you become magnetic. There's nothing more commanding than a person who is focused, elevated, and unbothered. You don't need to check in. You don't need to remind anyone you exist. Your energy, your presence, your silence. That is the loudest message you'll ever send. Detachment is your new superpower. You don't pull people in by running after them. You pull them in by rising without them. Focus on your purpose like your life depends on it. Build your body, your boundaries, your mindset. Reignite your passions. Reclaim your time. Become obsessed with your next level. When your eyes are locked on growth, confidence starts walking in front of you. And when confidence leads, people feel it. People notice it. People respond to it. You stop waiting for a call because you're too busy building a life that makes the phone irrelevant. You are not here to be anyone's afterthought. You are not here to audition for a place in someone's life. You are the prize, and when you carry yourself like one, people treat you like one. Raise your standards, not your volume. Protect your peace, not your insecurities. You don't chase, you choose. Every time you protect your energy, you communicate power. Every time you say less, you command more. Let your absence teach them what your presence used to give away for free. You've already proven you're loyal, caring, consistent. Now it's time to prove you're disciplined, detached, and unavailable to anything that doesn't meet your level. Stop explaining. Stop performing. Stop waiting. Move differently. When you stop feeding attention, you force reflection. When you pull back, the silence gets louder than any text ever could. Energy doesn't lie. When you step into alignment with who you really are, everything that is meant for you comes back louder, clearer, and faster. Not because you forced it, but because you finally understood your value. That's when you become unforgettable. That's when you get that text, that call, that chase. Because nothing is more attractive than someone who doesn't need to be chosen to know they're worthy. Now get up. Walk out that door, log out of that conversation, shut off the noise, and walk like you've already arrived. Speak like your worth is non-negotiable. Breathe like you've got nothing to prove. Because the moment you stop waiting is the moment the world starts noticing. Turn your pain into precision. Your silence into power. Your energy into elevation. The game changed the moment you remembered who you are. Let them feel your absence. You have work to do when you detach. You stop negotiating your worth through someone else's behavior. Detachment isn't about giving up. It's about reclaiming the energy you've wasted trying to control what was never yours to hold. It's the moment you recognize that peace is more valuable than validation, and your emotional stability is not up for discussion. You stop reacting and instead you observe. You stop reaching out and instead you redirect that focus inward. You begin to understand that your power doesn't come from their approval. It comes from your decision to stop depending on it. Detachment is the discipline of choosing yourself over and over again, especially when it's uncomfortable. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that if something is meant for you, it won't require you to beg, force, or chase. You begin to live in alignment with your value, and that alignment creates a vibration too high for anything low effort to stay in your life. The moment you detach, you remove the emotional strings that kept you stuck. You stop needing explanations, and you stop demanding closure. You realize you are the closure. This mindset isn't cold, it's clear. Detachment allows you to love, care, and be present without losing yourself in the process. You stop over-giving to prove your loyalty. You stop over-explaining to justify your feelings. You stop shrinking to maintain connections that are no longer rooted in respect. When you detach, you no longer tie your worth to someone else's actions, texts, or attention span. You become the source of your own power, and that shift radiates. The paradox is that when you let go, everything you once wanted to chase starts coming back. Not because you're playing a game, but because you're no longer emotionally hostage to outcomes. You're focused on your peace, your elevation, your growth, and that energy is magnetic. People feel the difference. The same silence that once scared you becomes the most commanding force you have. Detachment gives you leverage, because you're no longer moved by the noise. You walk differently when you're detached. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to explain what they already know. You start responding with restraint, not desperation. You stop fighting for things that stopped fighting for you. You stop making excuses for behavior that would never be acceptable if your standards were fully active. Detachment realigns your emotional boundaries with your logical mind, and that's when things begin to shift. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about no longer bleeding for people who wouldn't offer you a bandage. Detachment means you can feel disappointment without falling apart. You can observe someone's absence without letting it consume your self-worth. You start recognizing that your peace is not up for negotiation, that your time, your energy, and your presence are privileges, not default entitlements. And once you operate from that place, you stop settling. The moment you detach is the moment you gain leverage over your life. No more waiting by the phone. No more crafting the perfect message. No more analyzing mixed signals. You see things for what they are, not what you hope they'll be. You let people show you who they are without interference. You trust the silence more than the noise. You trust the consistency more than the promises. And above all, you trust yourself more than you ever did before. When you're detached, you become undeniable, not because you tried to be, but because you finally stopped trying to be anything other than centered. You realize that nothing and no one is worth losing yourself over. You stop performing for crumbs and start demanding full, course energy. You step into a version of yourself that doesn't bend for validation and doesn't wait for acknowledgement. You become calm, clear, and complete. And in that energy, everything begins to shift. Silence isn't emptiness. It's a statement. It speaks in ways that noise never can. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop defending your position to people who never valued your words to begin with, something powerful happens. You remove the access that once made you easy to reach. And in that silence, people are forced to sit with what they did, or didn't do. They begin to notice the absence of your energy, your effort, your presence. Because silence exposes everything that noise once covered up. When you're constantly explaining yourself, your value gets diluted. But when you go quiet, people start to pay attention differently. They begin to feel the weight of your withdrawal. The space you used to fill becomes heavy with awareness. Silence is unsettling to those who expect you to always be available, to always speak, to always show up. When you don't, when you remove yourself from the conversation completely, your absence becomes the loudest message you've ever sent. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to post or prove or parade your worth. You simply need to stop giving people the luxury of your reactions. Because when you stop reacting, they're left alone with the consequences of their actions. You shift the dynamic without saying a single word. Silence disrupts patterns, it interrupts cycles, and it forces reflection in ways that arguments never could. It's not passive, it's intentional. You shift the atmosphere by withdrawing your energy. You used to respond quickly, show up eagerly, offer grace too freely. Now you let the silence hold the boundary for you. You don't need to explain why you left the message on read. You don't need to justify your delay in replying. Your silence is doing the work for you. It's the loudest form of emotional discipline you can practice, and it demands a level of strength that very few possess. People remember how you showed up for them, but they remember even more clearly when you stopped. When you fall silent, the echo of your former presence grows louder in their minds. It lingers, it replays. They search for your voice, your laughter, your insight, and find only the space where you used to be. That absence becomes impossible to ignore. Silence makes people realize just how loud your existence once was in their life. It's not about being petty or playing games. It's about reclaiming your emotional control. You don't silence yourself out of fear. You silence yourself out of power. Because when someone can no longer trigger you into a reaction, they lose the control they once had. And in that moment, they start questioning what changed. They start noticing what they took for granted. And they begin to crave the certainty you once gave so effortlessly. Silence is clarity. It filters out the distractions. It lets the truth rise to the surface. You learn to listen more, especially to what isn't being said. You start to trust your intuition more, because without the noise, you can finally hear it clearly. You begin to protect your peace not by building walls, but by simply not responding. And that decision becomes the gatekeeper of your energy. You no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. In your silence you become unforgettable. Because while noise fades, silence lingers. It wraps around the mind, creating space for reflection, regret, and realization. The people who dismissed your words will start chasing your presence. The ones who talked over you will miss the sound of your support. And the ones who thought they had time will finally realize your silence is what they should have feared the most. There is a shift that happens when you stop looking outward for confirmation and begin looking inward for alignment. You stop obsessing over who's watching, who's calling, who's noticing, and instead pour that energy into yourself. The moment you place your focus on becoming, not proving, you gain an edge that can't be touched. People can feel it when you're grounded. They can sense when your energy is no longer diluted by neediness, approval seeking, or fear of being forgotten. Self-focus isn't selfish, it's magnetic. It draws attention not by demand, but by quiet force. When you turn inward, your vision sharpens. You begin to see things for what they are. You stop wasting time on conversations that go nowhere and stop pouring into people who never pour back. You become meticulous with your habits, your mindset, your environment. You move differently, because you know exactly what you're working toward. The focus on yourself becomes the standard, not the exception. And in that shift, your presence begins to carry a different kind of weight. You start building something unshakable within you. You reclaim your mornings, your routine, your mental space. You stop answering questions that don't need answers. You stop explaining choices to people who don't even understand your path. You operate from discipline, not emotion. And that discipline becomes your leverage. The more you focus on you, the less anything external can throw you off course. You're not easily moved because you're not easily distracted anymore. People begin to notice the glow, not just in how you look, but in how you carry yourself. There's a calm in your presence, a certainty in your steps. You don't flinch when someone pulls away. You don't chase when someone goes silent. Because your energy is no longer dictated by someone else's attention span. You're building something far more powerful, something that speaks for itself without needing to announce it. The irony is, the more you focus on you, the more others begin to turn their focus toward you. Not because you tried, but because you stopped trying. You stopped giving your energy away so freely. You stopped offering front row seats to people who barely showed up. You became exclusive with your time, your space, your peace. That exclusivity isn't arrogance, it's clarity. People gravitate toward what feels grounded, and grounded people are rare. Every time you invest in yourself, mentally, physically, emotionally, you communicate that you're not waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. You show that your worth isn't on sale. You prove that your validation isn't outsourced. And that confidence, rooted in self-respect, not performance, is what draws people in. It's not the words you say or the posts you make. It's the undeniable energy that comes from someone who is fully focused on their own growth. You no longer need to tell anyone how much you've changed. You simply live it. You let your results speak. You let your glow show. You let your peace make people curious. People who once took your time for granted begin to feel the shift. They can't place it, but they feel the distance. They feel the fact that you're no longer available in the same way. And that distance isn't a punishment, it's a boundary born from evolution. This is where real attraction is born, not from being loud, but from being aligned. Not from chasing attention, but from chasing purpose. You become magnetic the moment you stop trying to be seen and start focusing on becoming someone worth noticing. You move with vision. You speak with restraint. You lead with self-respect. And that kind of energy can't be faked, duplicated, or ignored. Everything changes when you decide that your life will no longer be a space for confusion, inconsistency, or half-hearted effort. The standard you set for how others treat you is directly reflected in how you treat yourself. When you stop tolerating bare minimum behavior, you immediately shift the dynamic. You stop hoping people will rise to meet you and start requiring it. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to beg. You simply create a level of self-respect that refuses to coexist with anything that falls short. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you accept, and what you walk away from. If you tolerate indifference, that becomes your norm. If you allow access without accountability, you train others to believe that you're always available no matter how little they invest. But when you elevate your standard, you send a clear message: your time is valuable, your energy is earned, and your presence is a privilege. You don't need to say much, your boundaries will speak for you. You stop giving passes to people just because of history or potential. You stop rewriting red flags as misunderstandings. You start viewing your life as sacred territory, not a revolving door for anyone unsure about their role in it. You begin to prioritize consistency over charm, action over promises, and respect over attention. You're no longer impressed by effort that lacks follow-through. You've seen enough, heard enough, and finally lived enough to understand that patterns matter more than apologies. Setting the standard isn't about control, it's about clarity. You know what you bring to the table, and you refuse to let anyone treat it like it's disposable. You don't lower your expectations to avoid being alone. You raise them because you know the right people will never feel threatened by them. You stop being afraid of losing people, and instead, you become more concerned with losing yourself by staying in situations that don't align with your worth. When you carry yourself like someone who knows what they deserve, you automatically filter out what doesn't match. You no longer chase, convince, or plead. You don't wait around for potential to turn into reality. You move on with grace when someone shows you they're not ready, capable, or willing. And that movement isn't bitterness. It's wisdom. Wisdom earned from every time you settled, ignored your gut, or gave someone another chance they didn't earn. People begin to respond differently when they realize you're no longer moved by empty words or shallow efforts. Your presence becomes something they have to rise to, not something they can take for granted. And that shift forces reflection. Those who once overlooked you will now overthink you, because they know they can't come back the same way they left. The standard you now live by is a mirror. Either they meet it or see themselves fall short of it. There's a different level of peace that comes with setting your own standard. You're no longer swayed by temporary attention or manipulated by mixed signals. You don't measure your value by someone else's recognition. You walk into rooms knowing you belong there, and you engage with people knowing your worth is not up for debate. You become less reactive, more selective, and entirely focused on alignment over attachment. You set the standard every time you choose not to settle, every time you protect your time, every time you say no to what drains you and yes to what builds you. You stop explaining why your boundaries exist, and you start enforcing them without apology. You know what you bring, and you understand what it costs when you lower your value to accommodate someone else's comfort. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be respected. And the standard you set makes that impossible to ignore. Your presence has power, whether people acknowledge it or not. It brings energy into rooms, comfort into silence, and clarity into chaos. It's not just what you say, it's the way you move, the way you listen, the way you show up. People feel when you're near because your consistency becomes a stabilizing force. But what they often don't realize, until it's too late, is that your absence speaks just as loud. When you stop showing up, stop answering, stop reaching out, something inside them shifts. They don't feel your words anymore, they feel your silence. You were the one who made the effort look effortless. You were the one who remembered the little details, who reached out when others forgot, who offered loyalty without conditions. But once that presence disappears, the absence starts to echo. It lingers. It questions. It reminds. The things that went unnoticed while you were available start becoming obvious when you're no longer in sight. The weight of what you used to give becomes heavier in your absence than it ever did in your presence. There's a difference between being missed and being remembered. Being missed means your absence disrupted something. It left a void. It changed the atmosphere. People don't just miss your presence. They miss the energy that came with it. The reassurance they never had to ask for. The patience they didn't know they needed. And when they can't feel that energy anymore, they begin to search for it in the empty spaces you left behind. Your absence becomes a mirror that reflects what they once took for granted. When you're no longer available in the same way, the silence becomes louder than any words you could have spoken. People start replaying old conversations, rereading past messages, revisiting moments where they should have shown up better, and that echo becomes the consequence of your withdrawal. Not because you wanted revenge, but because you finally decided to honor your value. You stopped giving out energy like it was infinite, and the shift spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. The echo of your absence doesn't just haunt others, it teaches them. It teaches them what consistency feels like by removing it. It teaches them what real presence is by showing them how empty things become without it. You become unforgettable, not because you made a scene, but because you left quietly and never returned the same. You didn't disappear out of anger. You removed yourself with grace, and that grace becomes unforgettable in its own right. What people often fail to realize is that you are the anchor, the grounding force, the calm in the middle of chaos. And once you step away, they begin to feel unstable, confused, or restless without knowing why. That's the weight of your presence, measured not by applause when you're around, but by the emptiness that follows when you're gone. People feel the contrast, and that contrast becomes your legacy in their lives. The more grounded you become, the less you need to announce your exit. Your silence is enough. Your distance is enough. The decision to stop making yourself so readily available is enough. You don't have to explain what they already know. You just have to step back and let the echo do what your words no longer need to. When people experience the full withdrawal of your energy, they realize the difference between someone who fills space and someone who is the space. Your absence forces clarity. It removes the noise and leaves only truth. Without your presence to distract them from their own actions, people are left with the impact of their choices. They begin to recognize how much you carried, how often you showed up, how deeply you gave. And in that space where you used to be, they're left with echoes. Echoes of everything you once brought, and everything they no longer have.